Okay, so this game he got it at level 8.
What's up, guys? How's everyone doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Eating some pistachios.
Ooh.
The problem.
Like ISO?
No, dude. I ate a whole bag of apricots this morning. I feel you.
Well, I got like 2 bags. I already ate.
Where's my game?
I finished one of them in like a day and a half. It's a habit.
I fucking love pistachios. The addiction is real.
Yeah, I have my goldfish stash.
There you go. Another favorite of mine. It's the snack that smiles back.
Goldfish.
So this morning, I got up to walk my girlfriend out of the house, and there's like a big wasp on my front door. And when I went back inside, it must have crawled in my shirt because I like went to go upstairs to go back to bed. And as I got under the covers, it stung me twice in like my hand and stomach. How was everyone else's morning?
That actually might be the most terrifying thing I've ever seen.
I thought like, so sometimes like my leg hairs and stuff get caught like on the fibers of my pants, and you get like you get that like gentle pulling sensation. And then I got stung again, and I was like, no, that's not what that is.
They don't like die after they sting, right? So
they keep going at it. The one that stung me, I looked it up. It was like a bald-faced hornet or something, and they're like super aggressive and mean. Not cool. I hope everyone else just like had a cup of coffee or something. That'd be way better.
I just woke up like, I don't know, like an hour and a half ago because I had a class before this.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Are you more of a night owl? Do you typically like stay up pretty late? And I'm that way usually.
Nah, I'm just lazy.
Heard.
I mean, I get up for work on time.
Yeah. Work is like, I don't know what it is. Like even the people with like the lowest motivation, like the thought of like missing a paycheck will get your ass in gear so fast.
I'm actually super butthurt.
What
I started working at this place in the Holyoke Mall, the Christmas tree shop, and they just had like a big talk the other day about how they're gonna get cut funding and how they're gonna have to let people go. And I just started working there like 2 months ago.
Never,
I'm like, well,
ever.
I guess I gotta go job hunting again.
I would, not to be like a Debbie Downer, but because you're so new, you're probably on the chopping block.
See ya.
That would never happen.
It's like, why hire me? What?
I know, it's kind of shitty.
I could have worked at Big Y.
Because that karma literally walked like this.
Maybe now you can.
Nah, it's true. They probably didn't film that shit.
Mhm.
For- Fuck off. Never would my kids do that. What the fuck?
Hey guys, I heard if the teacher doesn't get here in 15 minutes, we can leave the class.
Yeah.
Was that like, who started that? Because that's 112% a rumor.
Well,
Like-
actually, last year I had a class where one of my professors just never showed up to class. So we were all sitting there for we waited longer than 15 minutes, but eventually we just had to leave. So
That's fair. I feel like it can get excessive at a certain point.
I think it technically like is a rule for college, but like I only ever heard it when I was in like middle school, and it was like, where are we gonna go? We don't have cars.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, yeah. A cafeteria or something like.
I guess now you can just sort of like go off and something else, but I guess we're here. So, hello everybody. Good
Hi,
afternoon.
Professor.
Hello.
Hi Kyle. Nice to see you. Hi Ellie. Nice to see you again. I had a computer issue, but I think it's resolved.
No
Can
worries.
you all hear me? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So before I start, I'd like to actually do a roll call. Get my spreadsheet open here. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of run down the list and see who is here. I could sort of do it, but I'll do it by name. All right. Let's see. Allison Audette, you here? And if you could just make sure your mic is on so I can hear you say here, that would be good. All right. Matthew Blaine, are you here?
I'm here.
All right, thank you. Carolyn Byrne.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Benjamin Campanella.
Here.
Okay. Thank you. Brian, sorry, Gabriella.
Here.
All right, thank you. Brian Chan, are you here? Not yet. Okay. Nicholas Cipriani.
Here.
Okay. Is it Maya or Mia?
Mia.
Mia. Okay. I know that you're here. Kyle, I saw that you're here. Is it Hannah? Are you here?
Here.
No. Oh, you are here. Okay, good. Troy, are you here?
Yeah, here.
Okay. Okay, it's Annika, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. Evan, are you? Okay. Carl, are you here?
Yep, here.
Okay. Ellie, I just saw you. Here. Samuel,
Here.
thank you. That was Samuel Grossfeld, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Ian.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Joseph.
Here.
Okay. Okay, another Samuel. Samuel, it's my other class. Are you there?
Yep. Here.
All right, thank you. Trey Lawson, are you here?
Here.
Thank you. Caitlin, I just saw you, so you are here. Rose.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Brian McMahon, are you here? All right. Matthew Moriarty, are you here? Okay. Anna, sorry. Wait, is this someone who's saying that they're here that I didn't hear before? So Matthew, are you there by chance? No. Okay. Anna Pelletieri.
Yes, Anna. Hi, I'm here.
Anna, you're Anna. Okay. Kevin, Anna, and Annika. All right. Thank you. Isaiah.
Yeah.
Okay. Nancy.
Here.
Thank you. Zachary.
Here.
Okay. Jonathan.
I am here.
Thank you. Maya.
Here.
Okay. And Ewan, maybe?
Owen, I'm here.
Owen. Okay. Epic fail. Okay, Owen, you are there. Thank you. And Deborah.
I'm here.
All right. And Justin. Justin, are you there? Okay. So nice to see all of you again. How are things going for everyone today?
Okay. All things considered.
Yeah, not too bad.
There is a thunderstorm.
Mm-hmm.
I heard about that. It's right now. It's night where I'm at, and there's no thunder. So I heard that it was storming over there. Well, be safe. Stay inside. Be careful with the thunder. So I asked you guys to read the introduction to the Sarah Maza Thinking About History book. I think if I do, you probably can't. Yeah, it'll blur it out. But anyway, maybe if I do that, anyway.
This one?
The book. Yeah, that book. So before we get started, I wanted to sort of see what were your thoughts about the introduction.
I thought her take was really interesting. Like at the very end of the introduction, she made it a point to say that a lot of books target how you should write about history and like what good history or whatever looks like. She made it very clear that her intent is not to do that. Her intent is to talk about the different ways we think about history and approach it from like an abstract non-literature perspective.
Okay. So you liked it. You liked the way that she sort of, I see that Allison is here, and I didn't get you here before, but you're here. So you liked the fact that there was this conscious effort to not be sort of an instruction book, but more of an abstract thinking about history approach. Okay. Other thoughts you had on the readings?
I thought it was interesting too, going off of what Kyle said, that like it wasn't, the way she approached this wasn't too academic, because I feel like if you're thinking about history and like how you're supposed to research it, it can get into like the groove of being a little elitist sometimes. But it seemed how she approached it was like everyone can research history, and it just, everyone brings their own unique take to it. And I thought that was really cool.
Okay, yeah, so it was inclusive. It wasn't too, for you, too academic. Did anyone feel like it was maybe too academic? Did anyone feel like it was maybe too jargony, too many words that were not familiar? Because that could also be a possibility.
I mean,
no? Yeah.
It took me a long time to read the chapter, but it was less so because there were many specific or difficult terms, and more or because the ideas explored and it encompassed such a wide range of topics that you had to think about it not just as like specific facts you were reading, but as concepts, which I mean is the point of the book. But it did take me a while to get through it because I was thinking about that.
Yeah, so is that a good thing or a bad thing, you think, that it took you a long time to sort of get through some of those ideas?
I think it was good. It was like a little bit dense without being super technical. It would be like the best way I could put it. And even then, it wasn't terribly dense, but a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, very good. Other comments or thoughts before we get into it? Annika, yes.
I just thought she included a really interesting excerpt on kind of a scope of the American educational system and the 1944 like national history standard, and basically like her insight on why we don't have a very intersectional, like diverse history that's being taught in like primary education and high school and so forth. So I just
1994. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 94. Yeah. My bad. Sorry.
That's okay. It was a recent thing, or not recent for you guys, but recent for me. So I've never talked with students about that before. So I'm looking forward to talking with you about that some more. But that definitely is one of those, it's applied, it's very in your face and obvious that this is a contentious field, right? That there are sort of cultural stakes and that people take their positions, right? And that can create a lot of controversy and conflict. So that she included that, I think that speaks highly of her desire to make history relevant to the present. Great. Other comments? Evan, yeah.
I also like how she kind of acknowledged her bias towards being Eurocentric. And I think that really helps, even though it might not be as objective as she wants it to be, or it just helps to acknowledge that it is Eurocentric in some aspects. So that way, when you're reading it, you know what bias you're kind of reading it from.
Yeah, I think if you're working in another field like anthropology or, that's one I can think of in particular. When you start to write your research up, it's pretty common to sort of state your positionality, sort of who are you in reference to what you're talking about. Were you an observer? Were you a participant? Were you both? Do you belong to the group that you're studying or not? And historians have taken a long time to become transparent about their own biases. But I think that it's, pretty common as well. And at least among sort of the generation that is writing history today. And so that I think is reflected in her upfront. This is my background. This is what this is how I come at history and what bias I bring by definition to this task. So yeah, I also liked that, Evan. Other thoughts? Surprised you guys have a lot of thoughts. Yeah, Nancy.
Going off of what Annika said before, I also think it's interesting how she says like history changes all the time because of it's driven by the concerns of the present. And I think a lot of people, when they look at the study of history, like in an objective sense, if they don't study history, they think it's a very like black and white, like this happened and this was bad and this happened and this was good. And that's kind of like how things are today. But I think like the way she explained how the way we think about history is a lot of times not really based on what happened in the concrete sense, but it's kind of based on what's happening in the present and how we look at like past events in a certain context.
Yeah, that I think is a good comment and a good insight. I mean, so many of the movements that we have encountered, over the past century or so, have influenced history that has been done. The research we look into, the women's movement, for example, sort of to put a very vague label on a very diverse set of movements, has definitely impacted the way the historians have decided to go look for women's voices in the past and evidence of how they lived. So that's just one example, but there are so many of these, right? And so I think today we won't get into all of that, but the book definitely is going to be tying these historical moments of the past century to historians' efforts to look and to do different or new kinds of sources and new actors who have been overlooked in the past. So that also I think is a good goal that she has, and it's one that we should keep in mind. So thank you for that, Nancy. All right. So what I kind of thought was that we could talk about this introduction. There are a lot of terms that I'm not sure that people are familiar with, and that even if you are, I think, relatively familiar with them, we should sort of unpack some of these terms. So there are 33 of you, or wait, I guess, am I included in 33? I don't think so. So there are 30, oh yeah, I am. So 32 of you, I think, that are here, yeah. So I'm gonna put you guys into groups, into 5 groups. It'll play out how it plays out. And I'm gonna give you a term to sort of unpack. And this is, there's not like it's not a test, it's a conversation. I'd like for us, after we're done with your small groups, to talk about these terms. So I used this last class, the same sort of technique in my breakout room, but I had to go to each room and tell them what I wanted to talk about. And that was not my best way, my favorite way of doing that. So I'm actually going to like share my screen with you so you can see this as you get into your groups. So I'm going to number these like from like 1 to 5, and then whatever group that I'll tell you which group that you're in, I guess, and then you'll be able to know which term to discuss. Okay. Okay. All right, so presenter view, and then, so I'll put you into your breakout rooms after I do this, so you'll know what to do, I think. Okay, so take a second, look at these 5 terms, and okay. So group 1 is going to work on historical contextualization. Group 2 will be talking about empiricism. 3 will talk about temporality. 4 will talk about causality. And 5 will be talking about narrativization. Okay, and this is in the context, again, of our readings, but also broader thinking about historians do what we do and what these terms mean for historians. So, I'd like for you in your groups to introduce yourselves to one another. You can maybe just say, like, you can introduce, my name is such and such, where you're from, be your major. If you're a history major, that's probably normal, but it's not, that's okay too. And then after you've gone through that a little bit, the term that your group is going to work on, try and unpack that term and think about the chapter, the intro that you read, and about your other knowledge, and let's see if we can unpack this together as a class afterwards. Okay, so let me zoom back out of this. Stop sharing my screen. Stop share, okay. And so I think they should be numbered like 1 through 5, the breakout rooms. So just kind of follow along with what I just showed you. I can also remind you in a second as well. Okay. Okay, folks. Glad we were able to do that. I'd like to ask for those of you who are in group 1 to just raise your hand so I can see where you are on my screen. The first group talked about historical context, contextualization. So let's see. Oh, okay, I got one hand. Okay, 3. Okay, all right, this is a good page then. From that group, I'd like to see if were you able to get to know each other a little bit? Do you get to introduce yourselves to one another? So Nancy, give me a classmate's name from your group, please.
Owen.
Owen. Okay. And I think Owen is actually on the same screen. Great. So Owen, could you tell me a few things that your classmates had to say about historical contextualization?
Short, historical contextualization has to involve doing your best to look at an event through the lens of maybe even a person who experienced it, trying to leave behind what you think you kind of know based on where you are currently in time. And it's a lot of information gathering to kind of set the scene to better understand something that occurred.
Yeah, like I wasn't sure where you're going with that, although it's kind of interesting. But the last part I think is what really drives it home, right? The idea that you're setting the scene, like what is happening in this scene. I like that. Nancy and other people in group 1, how can you guys add to Owen's description, definition of historical contextualization? Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
We also said it's kind of taking into account factors that might not be obvious from a present standpoint. So kind of looking at different things that maybe you don't really think of when you think about the big picture. So like the economical situation, the political situation, the cultural situation of the time.
Okay, right. So someone living at that time may not even know all that's happening around them, and someone living today looking back may not also sort of innately know all the context, right? So historians are trying to unpack all that, to find all that out, the historical, the economic, social, political context, to help to fill in the scene. That I think is well put. And the more I say the word scene, the more I think that this is a really good way to frame it, right? That it's if you think about like a game, like where you're looking at like a whodunit, and it's an image, and you're trying to figure out in this image what happened. The smallest piece of information missed can lead you on the wrong pathway. So it really is important for historians to make sure that they have a clear picture, not a blurry picture, or one that is missing the right corner, but one that really has all the elements, as much as you can get. And that's what you both, I think, have said there very well. Okay, so to the rest of the class, do you want to add anything to that before we go on to the next of our 5 topics? Like a burning desire to add to what we've got from group 1 on historical contextualization. Is that Ellie, your hand up? Yes.
Well, this is just another way to describe the points that have already been made, but would it be incorrect to say that part of historical contextualization is like looking at things and factors that frame a particular event? Would that also work?
Yeah, the framing. Yeah, definitely. Right.
Okay.
And we're still sort of in the analogy of the image, right? The scene, the framing. I think this is that also works really well. And also framing is important because you can decide how large a framing you need, right? How narrow a framing you need, and at what scale of frame will allow you to get the right information. And as we'll see as we go along in the textbook, one of the historians, debates has been what frames should we look at, and what frames can give us the most information. And sometimes, in fact, a narrow frame can also give you information as well that is very useful and insightful, depending on what you're trying to find out. So that's also a really good point, Ellie. Thank you for that. Okay, let's go on to group 2. I asked you all to look at this term empiricism, which is a term that has meaning beyond history as a field of study, but we're going to try and focus on history for the most part. But who is in group 2? Let's see a few hands up from group 2. Ellie, Deb, Carl. Oh, okay, Benjamin. All right. So, Benjamin, can you tell me what? Let's see. One thing about one of your classmates, besides their first name.
I know that all of them are history majors because we all mentioned how like this class is a mandatory requirement, so that's why we're all they're all history majors.
That's an easy one. Nice. Okay. All right. So tell me a bit about what your group came up with in terms of defining empiricism.
Well, we largely defined it in like a more layman's term, where it's seen as like objective evidence. Like typically in other fields, it's seen as like numbers backing something up, or something that you could test in a scientific environment and you would find it 100% of the time coming true. I know in context of the reading, Amaza tended to describe empiricism as more difficult to come by with history, considering how broad the field is. So that was my general take of it.
Okay, I think that it's difficult to attain, but I think we can add to that some more too, right? And build on that with some more insights as well. Carl, what can you add to what's been said already to help us understand, using Maza, empiricism as a concept in history?
So Maza talks about how a lot of historians kind of focus on one period, and how that is kind of like the most important part for them, and like how other things don't really come into play when they're studying that. But then she also says that a lot of historians do have to look at the context of other parts of that and similar parts of that period to find that. So not a lot of historians are, fall to that empiricism, that idea of empiricism. I think that's how I interpreted it.
Okay, so what I think we can sort of gather from this is that you all picked up on the part of Ma's argument in which she's saying that empiricism is, in some ways, historians with their methodology and with their focus on sort of on specifics, are not as attuned to empiricists or empirical trends as like a scientist that is looking at data that's hard data might be. So I will give you that. But I would also argue that she also calls historians the ultimate empiricists. And so I'd like to see if we can also think about how that can also be true, right? And what she means by that. Deb, are you able to add anything on that part of the argument?
Just probably, to me, it seems like with history, it's more like trying to be factually accurate, but it's hard to do that in this particular field because there's who's deciding what the facts are. So it's harder to be really scientific about it, but that's what I got the idea of it. I don't know.
Okay, so there are a lot of pieces of information that cannot be sort of considered as factual because it's relative, right? Who won a war might be easy to know, but it may be difficult to know, right? So those kinds of questions, they can definitely make it harder to deal with this label of empiricism. I was thinking about so like on page 4, Mazur writes, the work of any given historian is deeply rooted in the specifics of a certain time and place, incommensurable with any other. In that sense, historians are the ultimate empiricists. So I think that what I'd like for us to be sure and take away from that is that in a very narrow sense, but an important one, historians are not looking typically, right, for a trend that will explain everything, right? They're looking at a very narrow time period, a very narrow window or frame, to use Ellie's term. And because they do that, and they're not looking to answer a big question usually, and answer a small question, they can be looking very closely at their data in a way that scientists don't. So a historian doesn't need to have 1,000 data points to make an argument. They just need the right ones, right? But a few of the right ones, well analyzed, to make that argument. And this is what allows historians to make these arguments that are, we won't call them factual because, facts, there are things, but there are things that are not factual, but we'll call them convincing, right? Arguments. And that's all historians try to do. So historians have tried to use data and large data, and some have failed, some have also tried. But for the most part, historians focus on trying to get as right as they can that very narrow question that they're trying to answer, using the very few well selected and well vetted, well analyzed, justifiable data points. And so in that sense, they're closer to those data points than a scientist would be. A scientist might see 1,000 data points that are all the same, but might not realize that in fact some of those points are because of various contextualization issues were not the same, right? They were just the same at one moment in time, or they were the same, from this point of view, but not from that point of view. So not to get too far into the theory of all this, but it's important for historians to sort of recognize that our job is not to try and solve the big theory problems. Although sometimes history can be used to do that. Our job typically, especially historians or at our level as apprentice historians or as junior historians, is to get those few data points and analyze them really well, and with that be able to offer suggestions and arguments that are convincing. Let's talk about group 3, temporality. So if you're in group 3, let me see your hands, please. Caitlin, Carolyn, Matthew, Brian. Anybody I'm not seeing?
Yeah, me, John.
Oh, Jonathan. Okay. All right. So, Carolyn, would you please tell me something about one of your classmates that you met in your breakout room?
Yeah. I know Jonathan was talking about near Chick-fil-A, and he's gonna go to Chick-fil-A after class. But we are all history majors, so we talked about that for a little while too.
Okay. like, so, I mean, for me, it's like 9:20 and I'm really hungry. So thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, Jonathan, would you mind telling us a bit about what this term temporality means in the context in the historical field, unpacking that for us a little bit?
Yeah, I think just to really like generalize it, it's like you have to be able to put yourself in the time period that you're studying, because it's like you can't sit in 2020 and then pretend that all the stuff that you're talking about that happened in, like, let's say 1960, that they knew, they knew what was going to happen after, that they knew what they may or may have been done. They don't know the outcome, and so you have to try and put yourself in their shoes to try and figure out what they were thinking. And I think that's really the only way you can get the best understanding of why they did what they did. And so I think the idea of temporality is like you just have to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and if you can't do that, it's gonna be really hard for you to understand why people did what they did in history.
Okay, so I like a lot of what you had to say there, and the idea I think that you're getting at is that, to put it in terms of sort of the defined temporality in a more traditional sense, is that temporality is it has to do with time, right? Events, they happen at a time. They don't just happen in some sort of a void in which there's no structure, right? And so things that happen at a certain time, someone living at a certain time is living in a certain context, and the context is tied to the time, right? The year, the date, sometimes even the second, right? So knowing that context, because you know the time is essential. So they really work together. I think that's well said. Carolyn, what would you add to that?
Yeah, we were also talking about time in terms of like causality, like understanding history as a chain of events, and how being in a certain time will have like a cause, will be the cause of certain events in the future. And thinking about history as like a timeline is important to understand.
Yeah, right. So if we think, we try and avoid thinking history as a straight line, obviously, right? But in reality, historians and anyone actually who looks back at the past is going to see a line, right? And that the line is tying things together. And it might be correlation, might be causality, but it's going to be a line of things that are connected together. And to make a line, you have to put things in order. What happened first, second. So chronology is essential to the process of studying history. And that, I think, is a good point that is sort of helps us again to think about temporality as an important part. So there are, I won't, if we have time, I'm going to talk about some other stuff about temporality, but I think that's good for today. That's good for now. So thank you for that, guys, in group 3. Group 4, it kind of sounded like group 3 was going to start to get on your turf, but I think you have plenty of space to talk about causality. So who is in group 4? Raise your hands, please. Troy, Anna, Samuel, who else?
I'm in group 4.
Ian and Gabriella. Okay. Let's see. Samuel, tell me a thing about one of your classmates, please, in your group.
We realized that most of us are history majors, and we kind of talked about that and how some of our high school classes of history were pretty similar.
Like you had the same kinds of classes?
Yeah, I think we took away similar things from the classes.
Okay, like what?
We were talking about how causality, and we were talking about how it related to some of our past classes. Like we were talking about a Revolutionary War class and how it started way before 1776, like 200 years before even. So we were all talking about how we had similar perspectives from that.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's nice to know that the high school classrooms are giving you some good and apparently some common understandings of complex events. Gabriella, can you give me a bit of information about how you all define this idea of causality?
Yeah, we kind of talked about how to understand some events better, you need to kind of go into the temporality thing, but just analyze how each event could have caused the other. But at the same time, maybe they're not a direct like cause of one another. And also that sometimes tracing these patterns of causality can help kind of foreshadow some future event, even though sometimes those outcomes can be contingent. Like they're not, it won't always be the same outcome, but sometimes you can trace previous patterns of things that, of events that cause one another to foresee something else. But it helps to get a better understanding of each event.
So causality in our context as historians would be the look for things that lead to other things, right? But it sounds like you're saying that things are also contingent, and that so can you explain a bit more what you mean by that term contingent, and how that applies to the historian's craft?
Well, we were talking about how, because he mentioned before that we were talking about previous high school classes, and we kind of brought up how history repeats itself, and that analyzing how one thing leads to another can kind of, you can draw from the past to make some inferences about the present, but that necessarily just looking at how things caused and led to each other in the past doesn't mean that they'll happen again, that the same outcomes will come from it.
Okay, so lots of good points there. So one idea that you mentioned is I think that the idea of an event leading to something else and causing something are actually a bit different, right? They can be the same, but they can also be different. I think the idea of an event that has a role, contributes to something else, and leads to something else, or is part of that process. That's what historians are really good at, I think, arguing. It's often hard for historians to say, you know, this led so-and-so to shoot Abraham Lincoln on that day at that time, right? So it's important to sort of, you know, decide, we don't have to know the causality, but it's important to look for trends that do show contributions to, or things that lead to other things. That I think is well put. And also I was picking up on your comments about the way that in which history repeats itself, and that I think is a thing that we've all heard quite a bit. The author, I think, doesn't like that phrasing because sometimes it gets overused and misused and misappropriated. But what I think that is important in what you said is that a lot of the trends that we see and the kinds of connections that we see, they do repeat themselves, the same way that humans repeat themselves every day, right? Humans, you know, everything we do from, I don't know, from eating food to speaking to going to the bathroom, it's been the same, even though it's been different, right, for millions of years, right? So, well, sorry, tens of thousands of years. So being able as historians to recognize that although the situations will be different and we'll have contingent situations and things will not have the same outcomes necessarily, the patterns sometimes do repeat, the elements sometimes are common, and we can definitely sort of use those to sort of decipher what's happening in the present. There was actually a quote I liked a lot that I'd never actually read before until I read this book a couple of years ago. Historians are doing the mind expanding experience of sorting out complex questions within settings very different from our own. And so as historians, we're doing that, and that makes us, if we choose to be something else in our life, a politician or a broker or a banker, or to work, you know, whatever we choose to do, it sort of creates these pathways, right, in our minds that are open to problem solving and trying to make meaning and make sense of what we're looking at. And that's where I think historians really are able to get, I think, a useful training that can be applied everywhere, and that allows us to be useful in thinking about the present with the past, even if the past and present are so very different. Anyway, I kind of got off track there. Very good comments from group 4. let's go lastly to group 5. We talked about narrativization. So who's in group 5? Joseph, Sam, Kyle, Annika. Anybody else?
I don't know if you said my name, Rose.
Oh, Rose. Okay, so let's have Rose just tell us a bit about what your group came up with in terms of narrativization.
Okay. I was having trouble with my audio earlier, so I don't know. Is it coming through?
It's coming through right now, yep.
Okay, I'm gonna turn off my video because sometimes that makes it easier to go through.
Okay.
So for narrativization, we said that in general, it can often lead to like people might use it for nefarious motivations. So they'll connect events together to persuade the audience to follow like a certain opinion or to like believe in a certain thing that they just want to perpetuate and use narrativization to actually captivate the audience. You do it for certain reasons, or if you preface your paper or your book with the fact that you're using narrativation to just teach and give a certain perspective on events, it can actually like help your argument. So we were talking about like Slaughterhouse 5 was a good example of this because it just the reader learned more about history at the same time as just being engaged with it because you heard Vonnegut's perspective. I don't know if any of that went through.
Almost all that came through, and that was really interesting. And I had never had a student or students talk about that book before. So, EP for you guys, well done. That and Chick-fil-A, I think, have made my day or my evening. So you're hitting on the idea that narrativization is it's a tool, right? And it's a tool that is meant to be persuasive. And when writing any kind of text, right? There is a goal, right? But writing in a way that is, interesting and attractive, and that is meant to broaden the appeal of the writing, and also the story that's being told. It definitely is a tool. So that's true. But I'd also say that historians have to narrativize as well, right? No one can do it for us, right? No one is able to take all these pieces of disparate information about the past and put them into a coherent sort of chronology and to think about the idea of to decide which pieces are worth including in this narrative and which ones are not, or which ones are contradictory and why they're so, and sort of empiricism being applied there to get the context just right and the frame just right and the scene just right to make people tell the story, to be able to differentiate between causality and correlation and contribution of events. All these pieces, they work together to allow historians to make narratives, right? So being upfront is essential about what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to say and argue and your own biases. Historians do, by definition, our job is creating an object which is the narrative. So it really is a balance of these things together. Yeah, Kyle.
Yeah, I just wanted to posit something really quick, and I don't want to get too hasty in saying this, but would you agree or disagree or find some nuance if I said, although it's totally impossible to leave out narrative, and I'll kind of put narrative and bias in a very similar category, although it's like impossible to leave it totally out, the best academic historians, at least, like people who aren't writing literature, the best academic historians generally try their best to leave it out as much as possible, or is that a stretch?
No, they still have to narrativize. I mean, they still are writing, crafting narratives. and they choose, I mean, I wrote a book on Protestant churches in Japan's late 19th, early 20th century. And, I have to put things in order, and it becomes a narrative just by default, right? The question is, are you writing it to share information despite your biases, or are you writing it because you have a point of view, maybe political point of view, or an economic perspective, or whatever that you'd like to get across? That's where it gets. That's where I think we can differentiate between historians who are trying to be as close as they can to the documents, the sources, but bias notwithstanding, and those who are people who are writing to tell a story that they want to sell and make a lot of copies, fly off the shelves with that. But historians have to narrativize. That's it's one of our jobs. So doing so in a way that makes you different from a novelist, and how you use your sources and the data is what makes it, I think, a special discipline.
Okay, so I should be careful not to conflate narrative with bias, because I sort of treated them like the same. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. If you go back and look at the intro, it'll help. But I think as we go along, you'll be able to see that the narrative is what is making meaning of the sources, right? And that's what we're doing, right? We're trying to figure out what happened, and you'll be making over time, putting these things together to make a narrative, right? And when you write your papers at the end of the semester, we'll be making a narrative of your chosen topic that you're going to craft, right? And so our job together is to work on making sure that you do that in a way that is close to the sources, doesn't go and make claims that are unsubstantiatable or unsubstantiated, and that are not trying to make a point that goes beyond what you're able to make. Yeah. So thank you guys for that, taking part in this. I think it was the next exploration of the text. I want the class to be very, interactive. Today was, I would say, on the ultra interactive side, which is good. So I'm glad to be able to do that. I wanted to actually end class by talking about Japan, because that's what I work on. Those of you, Kyle and Nancy, have had in other classes. Caitlin, have heard about this before, but I want to talk about history writing in Japan a little bit and use that to illustrate some of these different pieces. So I'm going to use some old slides that you 3 or 4 have seen before, but that's okay. So I will do that, and then we'll be done for the day in about 6 minutes. All right? Okay, sharing my screen. Boom. All right. So when Japan was first becoming a monarchy with one leading family, they chose to write down the history of that family. The first imperial history was written in 712 in the Common Era. It's a document that was written in all Chinese characters, although the Japanese did not speak Chinese originally. They brought these from China. So it's very hard to read. It's complicated text. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But basically, it tells a story of the creation of the earth and of Japan. It tells the story of the divided origins of Japan's first emperor, Emperor Jimmu. And it also tells the story of the rise of this one family to become the imperial family. It's very much a Chinese genealogy modeled imperial history. History was like that before. But what I wanted to sort of get to, though, is what happens later on. It's actually more important than this story itself. So from about 1690 or so, a lot of scholars, mostly in the priestly class in Japan, were trying to, well, first of all, the printing press brought by the Jesuits made texts easier to copy. Basically, that's one part of this. So a lot of old texts were available. And so scholars were able to get their hands on more ancient texts. And they read, the ancient poetry collections from the 700s. They read all kinds of things to try and get an idea of what the past was like, Japanese language and culture. and those kinds of things. So that was going on. And they also read these old imperial histories, which were, they're basically illegible because they're not Chinese or Japanese. There's some hybrid that no one still today can fully make out. So I'm going to fast forward a bit. Several scholars, some who were tied together, some who were not tied together, tried to read all of these texts. They also read old Shinto prayers that had been passed down orally, lots of different sources. So thinking about, they were trying to establish the context. They were trying to create historical contextualization of the culture of Japan from almost 1,000 years before. But they had a lot of biases, right? A lot of preconceived ideas. One idea was that the past was better than the present. The idea was that the Japanese were a great, unique culture before Chinese culture came and overtook Japanese culture. This point of view was not at all rooted in documents. It was their present, right? In fact, impacting how they saw these texts. So I'll finish with the story of Motoro Norinaga, who was a physician and who was bored and who was very interested in poetry and literature and history, and who was reading the texts, reading the sort of the articles written by these various priests and other scholars. And he decided he was going to go ahead and get a copy of the original imperial history and read it and make sense of it. And so he read it, right? And he wrote a very long commentary to explain what it meant, because it's not readable. So what he thought it meant and why he thought that his ideas were correct. He used ideas from these other previous scholars who I mentioned before were very sort of anti-Chinese culture and pro-Japanese culture. And he created this idea, he propagated this idea that in fact, the imperial histories tell a story as a true story, not myth, but a true story of the imperial family of Japan being descended from the sun goddess, and therefore from deities, and that the emperor of Japan currently, who was actually not in power, he was beneath the shogun, who had the real power. The emperor should be in charge of Japan because he was divine, as this text showed, as this true historical text showed, and that Japanese culture was buried under Chinese culture, and that it was in fact better, simpler, and he used the poetry about nature and beautiful things from this older period to justify that claim. Why is this important? This is important because this history writing that he does, right? It becomes the basis for, well, first of all, he has many students and they go all over Japan in the early 1800s, but it becomes the basis for a movement that will eventually convince a lot of the warrior class to overthrow the military government and replace it with a true emperor, at this point, a constitutional monarchy, right? Based upon this ideology, which in the end is based upon the extremely biased and ahistorical point of view of one very popular historian, but several others before him as well. So we will bring our bias to the table as historians by definition, right? But being clear about what those are and doing our best to minimize them by getting lots of different sources, different kinds of sources, and the best sources will help to minimize that. But the ultimate goal of a historian is to really accurately reflect context, to make sure that we have chronology and temporality in our minds, to make sure that we are respecting the very fine line between contributions or leading to things and causality, right? And that we are writing a story in order to give more information as opposed to trying to sort of show or promote something that we believe in passionately. So that's all for today. Thank you guys for a great class. I think it was a great class. I will see you on Tuesday. We'll read our first text for then. It's an ebook, so you can read it online. And I will have a nice weekend, everybody.
Bye, Professor.
Thank you. Bye, Professor.
Thank you for the lecture today.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. You have a question, Brian?
Yeah. I think I may have been passed over for roll call.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't sure if I heard Brian McMahon or Brian Chan, and I was just a bit confused.
Okay, I've got you down here.
Sorry, I've just been like worrying about this since like the beginning.
Well, thank you for speaking up. Yeah, if you're worried, just you can always let me know. You can always also, if you're worried about stopping class, you can also just put it in the chat, and I'll look at the chat afterwards. But I've got you, Brian. And,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Bye bye.